Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Just a bunch of. That's not even the right movie, man. That ain't.
Hello, everyone. We are your spooky gentlemen.
I swear to God.
And we are now in Geeky Gentlemen Horror Month. Oh, ha, 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 ha. Ow. And we are doing one of the most fitting choices, thanks to the wonderful Steve Baxi. Before we actually get into that, I almost forgot. The real horror show is Look Who's Back, It's That Matt Kid.
Hey, what's up? Hey, how you doing with the face? Hey, I'm the Matt Kid.
And joining him, the picker of this episode, which I already named, but it's...
Steve. Yeah.
See, this is the
I forgot I was recording. I forgot I was with people for a second. I was just reading something online. I'm like, oh shit, I have to talk.
This is the true horror story right now. This is how this is going. But yes, we are, chaotic intro aside, we are reviewing the original, because there's been quite a few of these bad boys. Halloween by John Carpenter, right?
Yup, John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween.
Which, to say was influential and has a reputation would be an understatement. This thing came out and kind of was one of the big, impactful things of the horror genre and has changed it forever ever since. If you look through, like, the Mark Gatiss has a really interesting BBC documentary where he goes through the different eras of horror. And this Halloween is like its own part of that episode because the influence of it and the reverberations of it were just so big, which I think is interesting to talk about, and we'll probably get into it. But in terms of just a film, I want to ask Steve, why did you want to talk about it, and what are your general thoughts?
So part of the reason I wanted to talk about it is it's my favorite horror movie franchise. It might actually be my favorite movie franchise now that I'm thinking about it, because I don't think I know the history and watch as many times over and over again any franchise of films more than Halloween, even though most of it's kind of terrible. And every year I get some poor schmuck somewhere to just like listen to me talk for about 10 minutes about the continuity of these movies because it's so bad. The original Halloween I saw on TV one night when I was like 4 years old, and it scared me to death. And Michael Myers is, to me, the most terrifying single-looking figure of all time, even though he's not actually. Like, he's not really that scary. He's wearing a fucking William Shatner mask of all things. But because I saw his, like, deformed face when I was so young, it just terrifies me. So when I think of movies and horror movies in particular that are intending to scare you, this is the first thing that comes to mind. And I've seen this movie like dozens and dozens of times. It's one of these movies I could talk about without watching it for years, just because I know it that well at this point. It's not great. It's really, really influential. It's the first like real slasher movie, because Psycho doesn't totally count. It's responsible for an entire tradition of horror. The music is incredible. It's really, really interestingly made, but it's definitely not, by modern standards, the most watchable horror movie out there. My friend who I've shown this movie to once is a fan of saying Michael Myers is a punk-ass bitch, because he kind of is. Like, he's really kind of a punk-ass bitch, and it's kind of sad. And there's just moments in this movie where, like, he will topple over the stairs by being pushed by nothing, you know? It's kind of sad and pathetic to watch. Like, he gets stabbed by a coat hanger. Come on. Coat hangers. It's legitimately not the greatest movie of all time. It's not even one of the best horror movies of all time for me, I don't think. Especially given how far we've gotten since this movie. But I think it's the quintessential horror movie. I think when people think of horror movies and they think of all the tropes of horror movies and they think about all the things that are great and terrible and everything that you could put into a horror movie, it's in Halloween, for better or for worse.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I'm actually a pretty big fan of specifically slasher films. Horror in general, I do quite like. But when it comes to slasher films, you know, your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th, your I Know What You Did Last Summers, I've always actually really been into those. They're probably one of my favorite kind of schlocky things to watch. However, I'm kind of with Steve in this one in that I don't really love this one a lot. Like when it comes to like if you're gonna look at your I guess like big three of slasher movies, like if you're gonna like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and like Nightmare on Elm Street, like this one's always been kind of my least favorite. I've always been more of like Friday the 13th has always been my like go-to slasher franchise. Anytime I revisit this, and it could be because I don't really have the like attachment to it. Like this is probably the one I saw the most recently in my life compared to the other ones, so I don't have a lot of attachment to it. For me, I never really got into this one so much, and then as I watched more of the franchise, I pretty much got to Season of the Witch and was just like, okay, I'm done. we're gonna step away now. But then I did like the late remake. I thought was cool. So it's a franchise I've come back to a few times just because I like to rewatch these old slasher films. And on this watch, I did kind of pick up on a couple things that I thought were interesting. I really like the treatment of Michael as this ununderstandable force of nature that's this like immutable thing that can't be stopped, and some of the very blunt and on the nose conversations about destiny and fate, and so that it kind of lends this sort of air to it that I think kind of I found a little bit more interesting this go around. But overall, this is really not my favorite horror movie, but still a pleasure to revisit.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of landing where you are, Matt. Is Halloween was never. I'm generally not much of a slasher horror guy. I'm much more into your Hammer House of Horror, if I'm gonna go to anything, which obviously British. Those were the things that played more for me whenever they did. But even among the slashers, Michael never really appealed to me as much, because when I approach a slasher film, at least the understanding of I do is it's kind of got this inherent ridiculousness to it, but it's also kind of got the final boss, unknowable, undestroyable thing. And before going to this most recent rewatch, I normally just assumed, oh yeah, well, Freddy actually is probably the most dangerous one, because killing you in your dreams is the scariest goddamn thing. Jason is just a tank. He's just unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
It's when he goes to space and everything. He's just Solomon Grundy in a hockey mask. Like that's just how Jason Voorhees works. So that was always more of a threat. Whereas Michael Myers, even his backstory is just, oh, he's just a dude. And in this movie, like you say, Steve, he's kind of a punk bitch. But at the same time, I really did pick up on the thing you did, Matt, is when they're talking about and how he's framed and how he's shot, they very deliberately never go gory. You never really get a good shot of the guy. Like, even when he's in full daylight, it's like far off and he's not on screen for a little bit. Like, it's just long enough did I get the details of him and then he's gone? Or he's just in full shadow. And that mask, if you just see it, it's kind of goofy, but it's also in that kind of uncanny valley where it's just weird enough and so off-kilter that when you see it and it's just blank, expressionless human face but pure white, it really... I guess it's just something that looks incredibly good on film, on a film where it's shot like this with really heavy blacks. I think the more modern updates of Michael Myers have kind of shown how unscary that thing looks. it really was that design of him is really designed for this specific era of filmmaking, where the lack of HD kind of makes it scarier, because you almost fill in the blanks yourself, right? You almost picture kind of a Slenderman effect, where like the absence of detail makes your mind go a bit crazier with it. So that I all enjoyed. I really enjoyed the ideas of like destiny and this unknowable force and all of that kind of stuff. But that's like 10% of the film. Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's like a very, very short point of the film. And the majority of it is not necessarily him stalking people, but other scenes playing out of us following, I forget the actress's name, Jamie Lee Curtis's character.
You forgot Jamie Lee Curtis's name?
Yeah, man. Look, that just shows you a lot about my take on this film, right? But it shows you, like, we focused majority on that, and this did kind of set up the hero gal, the survivor gal trope, the gal at the end who's not as promiscuous or as the saintly virgin trope, I should say, of like she gets out the way and she's the one who survives at the end, but she's also the bravest because she doesn't abandon the kids. She does her thing, and that lets her triumph at the end, and is a showing of like, she can do it kind of thing, against this horrifying, overwhelming force. Which again, you can take in so many different metaphors of what that's meant to be, especially during the time period where like the big stranger danger fear really was kind of at its peak. So that's all interesting, and it really does make sense for why it kind of blew up the way it did. Not initially, which I was surprised to find out, is when I did some research on this and I watched some documentaries, it wasn't a hit at first. It got pretty bad reviews until Roger Ebert and a couple of other critics gave it like, oh no, this is why you should enjoy it. And then more people started checking it out, and then it blew up. Initially it was kind of dead on arrival, which I was surprised about, because people just talk about like how big of a success it was. But I can also kind of see why. I can see why it is one of those films which I think does get more interesting the more you talk about it. But if you just go to watch a horror movie, it doesn't really do so well for me, at least in terms of like scares.
Part of the trouble with watching this movie as it comes out is, you're right, it is kind of blank, and there's some interesting talk here and there about Michael being just kind of primal evil, a force of nature. Personally, I don't like that as much as the more complex family relationship stuff, even though that's not particularly good either. But a lot of that stuff doesn't play until you start making copycats of this movie. It's not until you get stuff like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and eventually with stuff like Scream, where the sort of layers of this movie start showing up again. A lot of the early reviews did say that it was terrible, and a lot of it said it was sadomasochistic. Some people thought it was corrupting children. There was a minor uproar about it coming out, and most people just didn't really care about it. It kind of had the effect Joker did when Joker came out, which is you had basically two camps. One were people overblowing how terrible it was going to be for society, and one camp that said it's just kind of fine, if not bad. And then you had a few people who thought it was really good. And then those people sort of took the conversation away and historically made it think it was a pretty good movie. And that's kind of what happened with Halloween, where like it took a couple years before people really realized, okay, no, this is what it was going for. Knowing the production really helps understand what about it is supposed to be scary. Because I think if this movie struggles with anything, it's that I don't know intuitively from the script what I'm supposed to be afraid of, right? Like, the thing about all horror movies is that they're supposed to, like, be metaphors for something. They're supposed to be, this is a very particular kind of human fear, this is a very particular kind of human experience, and we're going to ramp it up and make it scary. Like, falling asleep, or drowning, or meeting a stranger in a hotel, like just these like really normal things that seem very benign that turn into terrifying things. If it's any movie from the 50s, it's communism, right? So with Halloween, you just kind of sit and watch it, and a dude escapes a mental asylum and stalks babysitters and then kills them. And the reason all the babysitters have sex is because John Carpenter didn't know what teenagers did, and literally says that he thought the only thing that they did in their spare time was have sex, and that was the only way for him to conceivably write them. And when you just look at it from that lens, like, what am I afraid of? Like, where's the fear? This is the thing that it's telling me about human nature. It's really not there at all. And it's not there until you start getting a host of slasher movies where this sort of becomes like the granddaddy of all of them and creates all those tropes. And you realize, oh, this is what I'm afraid of. Just the idea of being afraid itself in some sort of weird meta way. The fact that the movie was made only on like $300,000 is part of why the things that stand out as scary now would not have been scary at the time. Like, the reason you don't get a good look at Michael's mask is because they just didn't fucking have a budget. And if they zoomed in too much, you would have thought that's William Shatner. Like, it just didn't look good. There's just a lot of stuff here and there. Like, the reason the score it has like those only like 1 or 2 notes in it is because they just didn't have time to compose it and write the movie and direct it all at the same time, because it's all done by John Carpenter. But then it makes sense when you start playing it in the context of other slasher movies, and it becomes like the most recognizable of any of those scores. It was meant to be a one and done kind of horror film, and then it spawned a franchise that John Carpenter has kind of disavowed almost immediately. Like, he was involved with the second one, and he's involved with the new ones, but he basically does not give a shit about any of them. And so Halloween almost entirely lives and dies by the fact that other movies copied it, and almost nothing that has to do with anything about itself, which is funny to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because when you look at this film and kind of what I guess makes it stand the test of time, because even when you watch it, it is kind of such a simple film, and normally that's using a negative concept, but this is very clearly a good versus evil story. And the connotations to that, and the fact that Michael, we see him as a kid, and then he goes to a mental health asylum, and then it's currently designed as, oh no, he's the devil, but that we get no other indications of actual supernatural things at work other than, oh, he is insane, which is something like Batman struggles with a lot. Is Michael Myers kind of has that, but even divorced from analyzing to that side, it is just meant to be good versus evil. The stakes very plain, very clear, and you're meant to root at these moments and be scared at these moments and go for this kind of thing. Even if there's like themes of destiny as well, it's very much tried to be like a just one and done story. Probably the most pure horror movie to the extent where it's literally just called Halloween. The idea that this used to be called the Babysitter Murders is, I don't think we would have got the Babysitter Murders 1 to 6. Let me just say that. that name change is probably the reason why it took off, not gonna lie. But that's interesting to me, the fact that this is so... It's got a lot going on, but especially compared to John Carpenter's other stuff, it is really kind of pure. And I gotta give it that. I want to give it in a thing where like so many people can kind of get in their own heads with these kind of things and like try and fall a lot harder. I think the fact that this is very clear and very simple, and the limitations it did, where they just focused on doing what they could as best they could, really helps its strength and gives it legs compared to if maybe they did get overly ambitious, and if they did think, oh no, we have to focus more on Michael, more of those issues of the budget would have showed up, and it would have become uncomfortable to watch because they couldn't have pulled it off.
And see, that's what I like about it, is that at the end of the day, it's a very simple movie that's very, very short. It's not even 100 minutes long. It's got very minimal dialogue, and 90% of why you watch it is creepy music, seasonal fall houses with creepy figures lurking around, and some dude just going around stabbing people, and it's not even that bloody. Like, I was traumatized by this movie as a kid, but I could totally see this as the kind of horror movie you introduce to a kid to appreciate horror movies, because it's not even that scary.
Mm-hmm.
No. There is I think the other way the simplicity helps it, this is something that I always find kind of interesting, because like you look at something like Friday the 13th, the only reason those people die is because they go to that camp where that thing happened. Whereas in this, it's even kind of that trope that Joss Whedon pokes at with Cabin in the Woods of like the person who warns you that you're basically going to fucking die and you just ignore them and keep going. But with this, that simplicity kind of, there's a nugget of like something kind of terrifying that I picked up on this watch, which is just like, this just happens to Laurie because he sees her. Like, that's it. Like, she goes to the house, he sees her, and just gets fixated on it. That's it. This could have happened to anybody, but he just happened to see her, and because of his mental psychosis, I guess that's something, he just gets fixated on her. And it's nothing she did. There was no warning that she ignored. There was no trespassing that she did. It's just pure coincidence, accidents. This could happen to you. This could happen to your friend. This could happen to anyone. And so there's that element I was really struck by this go round. And that's something that I kind of held on to and I thought was really interesting, because not only does it manage to have that element of this could have literally happened to anybody, it's just bad luck that it happened to her. It also makes, I think, the somewhat bold choice to make most of these scenes of him stalking her be in broad fucking daylight. The time when you would think you would be safe and you'd be secure. It's like, nope, he's by that bush. He's behind those sheets. So there are a couple choices in this that I think are legitimately really good. And those would be a couple of them. Just the incidental nature, which on first viewing almost seems weird. Just like, why is he going after this random chick? That doesn't make sense. It's like, well, yeah, why? It doesn't make sense. He just sees her and decides he's going to kill her. Like, that's terrifying.
Well, and the other really cool thing about that is this is the first major horror movie that does, I don't know if there's a name for the particular technique, but like it does the thing where the way the camera is shooting the people you're supposed to watch who are going to die, it's very shaky, and it's as if you're looking through Michael's eyes and you're looking at things you're not supposed to be looking at. Mm-hmm. And so no matter how normal the scene is, it's got like this inherent unstable quality to it that makes it creepier. And so they do this thing where when you're looking at the girls just walking by, it's kind of shaky cam behind the bushes and stuff, like you're not supposed to be seeing this. But then when you're looking at Michael, it's completely still, it's completely straight. He's centered frame all the time, and he's just kind of hiding behind a perch and stuff, and he has all of the control. 20, 30 years later, It Follows, I think, amplifies that particular filmmaking technique like tenfold, but it's not possible without Halloween.
Oh, I agree. And It Follows is such a great example of a horror movie borrowing what these sorts of early slasher films, kind of laid the groundwork for.
And what I think is really, definitely what you guys are touching on there is the broad daylight thing. Carpenter said part of the inspiration when this film was in suburban American towns, and I know this as well, and even I just live in the UK, I think this is just a general human thing, a human fear, just thing we do as a species, is like there's always the haunted house. There's always the house across the street. Someone got murdered there, or someone died there, or even if it's just unfounded, there's always the house that, especially kids, will always, don't go to that house. That's the scary house. That's the one you don't go to. And that kind of fear at the time, again, was really amplified. It really was the idea of you could just be walking down the street and what's supposed to be the bastion of like 50s, 60s Americana, right? And this is the 70s, which has just gone completely cynical of all of that. Is the bastion of the American family life, of the family home, the neighbors, the beautiful streets, and the officer is going to be there to help you. Like all that. This film is just like, oh, that's bullshit. That's not going to help you one fucking bit. And like to the point of where it's shot, is you're right, Steve. Not only does Myers have all the control, but those streets are fucking barren. Like, it is just those people walking, and that's obviously a budget thing because they didn't need to get loads of extras, but it helps sell what the film is saying about that, of like, even if you're walking in your hometown, you are alone. And when she's running from Michael, and probably the best scene in the film, where she's running, she's smacking on everyone's doors and she's screaming, no one comes to help her. In the place where you're like, Freddy or even Jason, like Jason's probably the better example. You're in the middle of the woods. You're in Camp Crystal Lake. You are fucked. There is no one coming to help you. That's your fault for going there. The ending of those films, they managed to get back home. They're safe. Friday the 13th, Halloween, and to be fair, I haven't actually watched Halloween 2, but I know the premise of it, and I think the premise of it actually is a cool idea. It's like, even after the end of the film, you're not safe. Which I think is like...
It should be noted while you mentioned that, though, there are 3 Halloween 2s.
That's true. That is true. You can get into that if you want, man, because that's a whole load of nonsense.
Oh, God.
I'll get into that, don't worry. I just wanted to make it clear in case someone's like, wait, which one?
The first one. The one in the hospital. Because that's a cool idea again. It's just like, Michael Myers is the force which upends the wind conditions, which you'd normally be used to. The house you're supposed to go to, the neighborhood, the people you know, they can't help you. It's not going to work this time. You have to do it on your own. And it even kind of brings in some stuff that I do like, which I noticed, is this really does play up a lot of like Hammer horror tropes, specifically Dracula. In the fact that we frame Michael very much like Dracula. His victims are majority young women, always nearly in their house, in their bedrooms, what have you, and he kills in the night. He watches them during the day, but he only actually starts doing shit at night. And the fact that he even has his own Van Helsing, which is what I really picked up on this time, is the fact that we have his psychiatrist talk about him like how Van Helsing talks about Dracula, is what I really picked up. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm seeing the DNA of where this came from, just historically, horror-wise, of how we still get from this to this. The idea of the invader, the stranger in the neighborhood, we're now moving that away from previous fears of immigration and immigrants are going to corrupt all our women and stuff like that, to now we're moving to like, mental people, insane people are going to kill us and corrupt all our women. Like, we still some shit we need to deal with, but the goalposts have been moved while keeping a lot of the same. As innovative as this is, I should say, it still borrows a lot, but I actually think it does it in its favor. I think those are kind of staples which always are gonna buzz people for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the universal appeal to this, that it borrows from all of those movies and it creates a trend for a lot of the others, but I think the sort of like distilled factor that you get in Michael, in this, where he's just called the Shape and he's credited as the Shape by the end of it, is that there really was no reason for why, at least in this movie, he goes after Laurie. The thing about her being his sister doesn't happen until the next movie. There's no reason for it. There's no way to understand it. And the kind of primal horror that Michael Myers is just that you're going to live your life and one day you're going to die and it's going to suck and it's not fair. And that's kind of terrifying. Like, of all the slasher movies, particularly the ones that are grouped in the same category as something like Halloween, like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, everyone does, like you were saying, Matt, they kind of do something. Like, it's not fair necessarily that Freddy goes after the kids in the original movie, but they have a relationship to the people that murdered him. Right. Everyone in Camp Crystal Lake goes to Camp Crystal Lake and fucks around and they found out what happened. You know, that's just how it goes. Hellraiser, you solved a mystical death cube. What did you think was going to happen? You know, like the problem with a lot of horror movies is the people in it are morons and they basically just invite death on themselves, and it's kind of hard to feel bad for them. And in every subsequent Halloween movie, it's kind of the same thing. Like the one with Busta Rhymes, Halloween Resurrection, they're like, Michael Myers is dead. Let's shoot a reality TV show streamed on the internet in his house. What did you think was going to happen? Of course he's going to kill you. Like, that's a terrible idea. But in this one, it's none of that. There's no reason. There's no rhyme. It doesn't make any sense. He's literally just the shape of death, and death goes after everybody equally. And sometimes it tries to have a sense of humor about it, like dressing up in a sheet and pretending to be your boyfriend. But most times it just stabs you.
And that's interesting when you say a sense of... Oh, sorry, Matt. I don't want to interrupt you if you're going.
Oh, I wasn't going anywhere. I was asking if Halloween Resurrection was the one where they were like filming inside the house. And yep. Okay, I've seen that one out of context and thought it was hilarious.
It's really fucking funny because Busta Rhymes literally like sidekicks Michael Myers into electrical wire, and that's how they win at the end.
That's amazing. Anyway,
there is a kung fu fight between Michael Myers and Busta Rhymes.
Hell yeah!
That's that movie.
That's amazing. I apologize. Alfie, say your intelligent thing that you were about to say.
No, it was obviously not on that fucking level. I wish they just someone should make a fan edit where this film plays up exactly the same. But instead of the psychiatrist coming with the gun, his Busta Rhymes shows up and that scene happens. Then you've got the perfect Halloween movie. Cinema. Absolute cinema. Now, what I was going to say is, I find it interesting, Steve, that you say, like, sometimes it has a sense of humor about it, is how I saw that framed, well, specifically how a lot of this film brings up on it, is death is childlike, in the sense that necessarily Michael Myers is still that child that we start the POV with. He doesn't act any different than he did when he was a kid. And the people who notice him first and the people who recognize the danger of him are other children. And I don't necessarily know where I'm going with that, but I think that was definitely something that I picked up on, which I think is interesting. I'm just not sure where exactly the intention of what that is meant to mean.
So that's important. Maybe not on purpose, but it's important because Halloween 4 and 5 deals with his niece, who basically comes under the same sort of kind of possession that Michael does. And she mimics sort of his early murder and wears the same costume. In 6, Curse of Michael Myers, the kid in this movie, Tommy Doyle, is all grown up and is played by Paul Rudd, and he saves a kid who's the daughter of the girl from 4 and 5. And so there is sort of this tracking in at least the main Halloween franchise, the main Halloween continuity, with Michael and a fixation on children, and children in particular kind of having the most predisposed danger of death and also access to it in a really weird way. Halloween 4 ends with, after Michael's sort of out of the picture, the girl dresses up in the costume and stabs someone, and Loomis is on the ground and he's just screaming like, "No, not another one."
I've not seen those, but that's interesting. I mean, especially
they're pretty good. I mean, yeah, they're all bad, but like all bad horror movies 4 and 5 are pretty good.
That's like every fucking slasher franchise ever. Just like any franchise, once you get to 4 and 5. No, I mean, that's definitely interesting. I mean, there's something deeply disturbing about the opening of this film, the way that we see Michael, we see this whole murder, we have no context for it being a child, and then he walks out and we take the mask off and he's just standing there with the knife. I think that's such a solid opener for any horror film, and it definitely, it just taps into that kind of, that primal, I guess, that like loss of innocence that can be kind of terrifying. So yeah, really good stuff there, and definitely sets a strong opener for what you're kind of about to go through.
And that's the scene which I think is actually probably more impactful because of the imitations of Halloween, and there were so many Michael Myers lights that were stand in, is it's how it's framed, right, is you're not supposed to gauge it's a kid until the end. And you can probably pick it up that it is a kid beforehand, but like by the end of it is when you're really supposed to see, oh, it was the kid all along, and then do the big pan out shot and you see him take off the mask and such. But like how it's played now, if that came out now, people probably see that as like, oh, that's a really subversion of the Michael Myers trope. But it was the first one who did it. It's already subverting you expect the slasher to be the big, strong, scary guy, but really it was just a kid. This was the one that started that, and it also did that first, which I think is interesting. That we're already playing with the idea that evil necessarily doesn't have to be invincible. It's just always gonna come, which I think maybe is the justification for why Michael Myers is like a punk bitch, other than he did RPGs and he really maxed out his regeneration stat and power stat, but like his HP's at like 1. Like he's really bad. Like he's like a what's the Pokeball, like Shedinja? If you get one good critical hit on him, he goes down. That's just how Michael Myers is built. He's just a glass house under that fucking jumpsuit. So, but he will always keep coming back. Whereas like someone like Jason, who's probably the closest to example, because they walk very similarly. They have the same kind of faceless expression and big strength kills. Someone like Jason is necessarily, you're not going to knock him over. He's just going to tank it and keep coming. Which are different kinds of horror. For me, I personally do find Jason a little bit scarier in that aspect, just because it's easier to picture. The problem with Michael Myers is like everyone keeps knocking him down and then they always turn their back to him. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Keep doing it. Just watch him.
And that's the scene as a kid that freaked me out the most. It's towards the end of the movie, and Laurie stabbed him with a coat hanger, and she tells the kids to run across the street and get help. And she just like leans against the door and has this sigh of relief. And then out of focus in the background, Michael just like gets up. And as a kid, that was scary as shit. And as an adult, it's like, well, obviously, you should never have turned around. What did you think was going to happen?
Mm-hmm. And that's a trope that's going to continue to get played with all the way up until like something like Scream, where we're literally making fun of these tropes that have started all the way back in kind of this first of the really well-known popular slasher films. I guess Michael's a lot like, was it fucking Tom King's Batman? I'm still here. That's like Michael. He just keeps getting knocked down, but he's like, I'm still here.
So the thing about the punk bitch thing, which I mean, I think it's very fair to watch Halloween and be like, Michael Myers is a punk ass bitch, because he kind of is. But as the franchise goes on and as horror movies start to evolve, he becomes considerably less punk ass and is a lot harder to knock down. If anything, he starts becoming kind of a wrestler with signature moves, which is really bizarre. So, like, for example, I think it starts in 4 or 5. It happens the most in H2O and Resurrection, and it may happen in Curse. But he does this thing where he will, like, climb up a doorway and hide behind the door, and then someone will pass through the door, and then he will, like, pull up bar himself down from this doorway and stab you from behind. And it's just like his signature move at some point to just like pull up bar himself down from a doorway and stab you. And he'll do a thing that he does like once in this movie, but he does a lot more in later movies, which is they start playing up the fact that he's a big dude instead of just being like a lanky dude. And he will like literally choke you up and pull you up to a wall. The remakes that Rob Zombie does, he casts a dude that's literally like 7 feet tall. So you literally can't knock him over. He's just a tank. He's built bigger than Jason is in those movies.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that version of him, and he just looks like the Undertaker.
He might as well be.
Which is certainly a direction, but I guess it's also, I think it'd just be ridiculous if you took that version of that character and put him in this, which is kind of like the purer version of it. And that's the thing about horror icons, which I think is endlessly fascinating, is like most long-running franchises, they have like an evolution to them. But them more so than others, you really can see how they mirror the time they came out and the creatives around them, and because how people view what is scary changes like drastically from bit to bit. And even just from what you're saying, is I'm nowhere near as an aficionado, Steve, a connoisseur of Halloween as you. But you can just see the Michael Myers of multiple Earths, and how they react to and they adapt to the movies they came out in and the times, for better or worse. But even the worst examples, it still tells you something. I think having a blank slate, like a character who is just called The Shape, someone who doesn't talk, someone who you don't have to worry about getting consistent casting with. He's kind of got the Darth Vader appeal where it's not even the voice of James Earl Jones, it's just the look. You can go in so many different directions with that in so many different ways, where I guess it's interesting to see that they try to move away from that, because as much as I like the idea of, like, conceptually, like, the Halloween franchise, what they tried to do with the third one, right, is they were like, okay, let's just make it as every film has a different Halloween trope. We'll have, like, witches, and that's what this franchise will be. It will just be different Halloween horror movies. But they kept going back to Michael Myers because I think they rightly realized that they weren't ever going to get something as primal as that. And he can kind of already be that. Is Busta Rhymes can fight Michael Myers. He can fit in a number of different tones. Because, again, he isn't necessarily scary on his own. It's just the context and how you frame him. You can put him in other things because he doesn't have a personality. Whereas, like, someone like Freddy, who's very clearly defined, I think people probably have a little bit more of a visceral reaction when it's not Robert Englund, for example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To be fair, with Halloween 3, they didn't necessarily come to some drastic realization that this franchise has to be about Michael. It's just that Halloween 3 performed so badly and was up against its own imitators and still performed so badly that they thought the only thing they could do was go back to Michael Myers, which is why the fourth one is called Return of Michael Myers.
And don't get me wrong, Halloween 3 deserved to do badly because
Yeah,
it's awful.
not very good.
But I mean, it's the idea of taking Michael and having him, like in the Rob Zombie films, kind of act like and visually more resemble someone like Jason Voorhees, who's like a tank. See, I really don't like that, because to me, you look at your big three, you look at your Michael, your Jason, and your Freddy. The fact that Michael can be knocked down but keeps coming is exactly what makes him scary, because he's, of those three, he's evil at its most human level. Like, he's just a guy, which in some ways can make him less scary because, you know, you can knock him down, you can fight against him, but the fact that that doesn't do anything because he just keeps coming no matter what, there's that element of just, he's just a human being who just wants to murder you, and there's something kind of primal and scary about that, versus someone like Jason, who even from the get-go there's this supernaturally sort of kinda slant to him, whereas with this there's never a hint, at least in this first movie, that there's anything supernatural about Michael. He's just a very driven dude who's just ready to accomplish his goals and is not going to get not going to let anything get in the way of him. And I think there's something kind of terrifying about that, because he is just a guy.
The modern horror monsters, and including Freddy and Jason, I think go to the Wolverine school of filmmaking, which involves they get attacked and you see them pull the thing that attacked them out of their body and regenerate and then go again. Like, you'll see multiple times, like, Jason will get stabbed and he'll just, like, pull the arrow out of his chest and keep going.
Yeah.
The scary scenes that involve Michael Myers are not the ones where he clearly should be dead and gets back up. It's the scenes where he clearly should be dead and his body disappears. And then he comes back out of nowhere, you know? Like, that's the thing that I really like about it, is that, yeah, he will just keep coming, and he is just a dude. But even if there's something supernatural going on there, you don't see it. You don't see him act inhumanely strong or inhumanely regenerative. He just disappears and comes back like nothing happened.
Mm-hmm. And that precisely, I think, is the way you do that. If anyone listening to this has ever seen their channel, is recommended. Is there are a bunch of people who do like Nerf or airsoft things called Node, and they have a game they play, which is basically Halloween as a game where one player will be in a house and they rent out this big mansion-sized house, and the other players will have to try and get or cool the cop or find the keys and the gas to get out of the house and escape. And one of the rules in that game to simulate that's the scary part is the killer is allowed to shout freeze, and then every other person playing it has to close their eyes, cover their ears like almost like ostrich style for 20 seconds, and the killer can't kill them during that time. It's just they're allowed to move around the house completely. So when you open them, you have no idea where they've gone.
Oh my god!
So, but
That's
like,
so fucked up.
That sounds amazing.
If you look it up, like just like watch like type in Node Halloween Nerf or something, and like one of the things that it like legitimately fucked me up as well, because they've got like GoPros on like the thing, is they'll be going down the house, they like shout freeze, so you have to stop it, cover the camera, they get back up, they go down the corner, and oh fuck is that? It's like it's legitimately it is the scariest thing about a Michael Myers type is that just pure control of space as a concept. Is not only do they control the camera, but they control the editing. They could show wherever the fuck they want. You have no what you thought was familiar and what you thought was safe is just the worst. Like there's no escape, there's no thing. So I think 100%, Steve, you're on the money for that. That is probably the scariest thing about Michael Myers, and the thing that has been taken and given to so many different people, because that is such a primal fear that I don't think people will ever get over, is not understanding your surroundings and thinking you know where something is, and then that just being completely wrong in a life and death situation is one of the scariest things you can possibly experience.
Yeah, and the Halloween franchise is good about this, where it'll sort of be the impetus and invention for a lot of these things, but it'll do it in a way that's really, really unique in its own context, and then everyone copying it will do it, but do it in a less inventive way somehow. So you mentioned this earlier with the reveal that it's a kid, but also the thing with Michael being indestructible, which is every horror monster does this, but Michael's is the one that's scariest because you don't see them be indestructible. You just watch that they show up out of nowhere every goddamn time. This movie is decidedly less bloody than I think basically any slasher film I've ever seen ever. Like it's the least slashing. It has the least slashing of any slasher by far. It's less bloody than Psycho of all things. And then Halloween 2, the original Halloween 2, not the two others, is really, really bloody, and it's really, really gory. The guy who directed that one's name was Rick Rosenthal, and it was written by John Carpenter. And the way John Carpenter describes it is he like got in a hotel room for a month, and he had no idea what he was doing, but he had a lot of beer. And that's how he wrote Halloween 2. But his big sort of contribution to that movie is we're going to make it really bloody and we're going to make it really gruesome. And Halloween 2 is not a particularly great movie by far either. I think it's probably the weakest in the whole franchise, if I'm being completely honest, even worse than Resurrection, because at least Resurrection is funny. But in Halloween 2, it got a lot of acclaim for being really creative with its gore. And every slasher movie after this would be very gory, but none of them are as uniquely gory and weird as Halloween 2. Like Michael burning a guy alive while simultaneously drowning him because he's in a hot tub. You know, there's just stuff about the gore in Halloween 2 that's legitimately weird and creepy and different. A woman like having a bloody hand and sort of leaving a bloody streak on Michael's face. Like there's an attempt to make the boring gory interesting gory in that movie, even if it's not particularly great. And Halloween's kind of always done that. It's always been ahead of the curve on some element of horror that would get played to death. And even if it wasn't particularly good in that movie, it would be more unique than you would see it play out in other things. in both Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, you'll see stuff about Freddy and Jason being like cosmic entities or controlled by magic on some level. Michael Myers does this too, because in Curse of Michael Myers, you find out he's being mind controlled by a group of evil psychiatrists who basically use him to kill people on specific nights. And that's also just batshit crazy and weird. But of all of the weird supernatural movies in horror slasher franchises, Curse of Michael Myers is probably still the best, almost solely because Paul Rudd's in it.
Is he really?
He is. It's great.
That's amazing. Yeah, unfortunately, I really haven't seen. I've seen the first 3, and then I've seen the like late sequel that was just made with where they brought back Jamie Lee Curtis. And how do you feel about that one? Because I mean, there's been a number of like late sequels to specifically Halloween 1 or Halloween 1 and 2.
Yeah, I didn't like it. The new Halloween movie that came out in 2018, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting 2 more sequels. One was supposed to come out this year, but it got delayed because of the world's ending.
Sure.
But the sequel to the current one's going to be Halloween Kills, and the one after that's going to be called Halloween Ends. But Halloween, the new one they made, it's basically just a remake of Halloween H2O, and it's not as good as Halloween H2O. It does the thing that I really, really hate in all movie franchises, which is you want to bring back the female character, but you want to make them strong and interesting in the generic way. And by strong and interesting, we mean crazy out of their mind and obsessed with guns. And it's just way less interesting than H2O, where Laurie is a school teacher and lives in a boarding school and has legitimate PTSD, versus that one. That one is funny in very weird, unintentional ways, and I think it's one of those movies where I think it looks too good. It has too much money. It really deserved a budget cut. It needed to look grimier than it did. I didn't like it very much. But you bring up a good point, and so I'll go through those rundown. There are a lot of sequels to Halloween, and there are a lot of sequels to literally the first movie, Halloween, and they are not all in the same canon. So there's Halloween, and then there's Halloween 2, which introduces the idea that Laurie is Michael's sister. And then there's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which has nothing to do with anything. Then there's Halloween 4 and 5, which are called Return of Michael Myers and Revenge of Michael Myers, that are a sequel to 1 and 2, but ignore 3. Then there's The Curse of Michael Myers, which is a sequel to 1, 2, 4, and 5. Then there's H2O, which ignores 3, 4, 5, and 6, and is a sequel to 1 and 2. Then there's Resurrection, which is a sequel to 1, 2, H2O, and then It, and ignores 4, 5, and 3, and 6. And then there are the 2 remakes that ignore everything. And then there's the new one, which is only a sequel to the first one.
Oh, it's not even a sequel to 2?
No, because in the new one, they're ambiguous about whether or not Laurie is actually his sister, and they say that it's just a rumor. And in Halloween 2, she like definitively understands that she's Michael's sister.
Okay. Huh. Fascinating.
Indeed.
I'm fascinated.
What is the connection between Michael Myers and Godzilla? Why is it just those two that this happens to? Why do we have these long-running monsters that will have... The first one is just everyone loves that one, and then we'll do some others, and sometimes we'll count the other sequels, but really, we just keep making endless sequels to the first one.
I don't know. We kind of do that with Alien a little bit. We do it with some things, but not as much as Halloween. Jesus.
I would be more okay with it if there were not 3 movies literally called Halloween in the Halloween franchise, and that there were not 3 movies in the Halloween franchise that were Halloween 2.
Like, are we gonna eventually, like in Halloween Ends, is it just gonna be a Spider-Verse type deal where like all the canons get merged into one?
They might as well. And you know the weirdest thing? Because this is the one that really drives me up the wall. And it's a similar thing to the Thing movie, which we learned after watching it that it was a prequel to the other Thing movie, which is there's the original 1978 Halloween, which we're talking about. And then there's the sequel they just released that Matt was talking about. So there's Halloween, and if you only count the canon of these new movies, there's Halloween, and the sequel to Halloween, Halloween. Which will now have its own Halloween 2, despite it being a Halloween 2.
You know what? This is actually the scariest part of this entire watch through and talk. This is the true horror. This is the shape of the title. that's the fucking monster.
If you're being super literal about it, there were 3 movies in this franchise named Halloween. There were 2 Halloweens that are a sequel to Halloween, and there are 3 Halloween movies that are Halloween 2, and a 4th if you count kills.
Steve.
Very
confusing.
confusing.
I regret bringing you up for this. I regret mentioning all of this. This is just ruined my evening now. I was in a good mood, and now the contemplating of how Michael fucking Myers of Mum People has a more complicated backstory than Cable.
He really does. Like, is he Laurie's brother? Is he not? I have no idea.
I'm surprised they haven't made one where they turn out, they were actually lovers. Like, fucking, that's how Halloween Ends is gonna end. Is they'll actually complete the horror trope of everything where the killer gets with the final gal.
So actually...
Oh my goodness, fucking bitch.
The Rob Zombie movies kind of toy with this idea, and it's less of a sisterly thing, and there's definitely more of a weird romantic thing going on. And there is more of a, in the Rob Zombie movie, there is more of a Michael captures his sister, not because he wants to kill her, but because he wants to be with his family, and he's trying to Beauty and the Beast style, just like show her, no, see, I'm your friend. And she just horribly misunderstands, probably on the count of the fact that he murdered everyone she knows. Yeah,
but like, come on, it's so easy to get tone mixed up. Especially, when you're wearing a full face mask. Like, he could have been like smiling, like, hey.
He really could have. He could have tried harder. He could have communicated better with his eyes. We've been learning how to communicate with masks these last 6 months. He could have tried harder.
I do. I never really thought about what you said, Elfie. I'm bringing up something that we said like 45 fucking minutes ago, but the idea of the because we haven't really talked about him much, the like psychiatrist doctor character being like the Van Helsing to Michael Myers, I think is kind of interesting, because that's something that's kind of unique to this movie versus some of the other big slashers. Is we have this older adult presence who's someone who's like really invested in trying to understand this evil character, and that's kind of a unique angle. He as a character provides kind of a unique way to look at the movie, because we don't really get that in a lot of other slasher movies that I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think we get it in anything, at least not in the major franchises.
Yeah, so I found him kind of interesting this go around. I don't know that he does a lot, but I just realized we haven't really talked about him too much.
I think the best thing he adds to it is, again, like the thing I enjoyed the most, which is the mythic nature. Like when he talks to the cop,
he's just the hype man.
Yeah, he is. He's Michael's hype boy. He's the one who writes. He's the trailer guy. Like like, you don't understand. Is he a man? Maybe. Evil. Like it's like he's that guy. He's every good monster worth their salt needs a hype man. Like Jason's lucky he's got like a location. Like Camp Crystal Cape is his fucking hype man. The alien doesn't have a hype man. Like fucking Freddy doesn't have a hype man, and he probably shouldn't because he's a pedophile. But like Michael Myers made sure when he was in that hospital, he's like, okay, bro, I'm gonna break out, and like I can let you stop me, so you're gonna look great. But like, I need you to make sure that people are fucking scared of me. All right, like I won't hurt you. You'll be fine. But like, I need you to just do this for me. Do me a solid. He's like, no problem, man. Do you want me to give him the usual? He was crazy instead. Blankly kind of routine. Yeah. Because I actually am very insecure about my voice and my acting ability. So it'd be actually a lot easier for me if I don't have to talk. No problem, man. No problem. Like they're just bros and just plan this fucking gig. The layers, the subtext.
It's like my
Donald Pleasance plays it up really, really well. You do kind of get a sense of because the first time I watched this movie, my mind just went, "This dude is the worst psychiatrist ever." But
he's got the least faith in his patient out of every other person.
this dude's got the devil's eyes. Problem solved.
He's like a fucking Arkham psychiatrist from goddamn Batman. He's just like, I don't know. If this guy was like Joker, like he's like fucking Joker psychiatrist, just some fucking, I don't know, he's evil. I don't know. I don't know. But like my favorite bit, he's like talking to the cop, and the cop's like, oh well, we gotta alert the neighborhood. Like people gotta know. And he's like, no, we shouldn't do that. Fucking why?
No, you know the funniest thing about this guy? Probably the thing in the whole movie that just made me like cackle for like 2 minutes straight is he's like, don't worry, I'm on stakeout, I've got this, and he's just like standing outside awkwardly in the cold and the dark for like a fucking minute before he, oh, that's his car. And it's just like across the road.
Like, are you just now seeing that?
That was just killing me, man. Like, this guy is just the worst.
He's definitely the worst, which is definitely the opening to the point. But there's also, I think Donald Pleasance as an actor at least tries to make it seem like that Loomis is not just terrified and given up faith on Michael. He's someone that tried for a really long time to get through to him, and he was the one who had the most faith in him and completely lost it. You know? Like, he feels like, insofar as Michael is ultimate evil, Loomis is the devout Christian that lost his faith in God after seeing him, you know? As the series goes on, he becomes more and more sympathetic and tries to help Michael out. It never works. And in the second one, he basically decides that since he can't save Michael, it's better to kill himself along with him, which is why they blow up the hospital. When you get to the fourth one, there's a really funny scene where he throws a net over Michael and Michael's trying to like get out, and then he just takes like a fucking 2x4, starts beating the shit out of him, and just starts screaming, "Why won't you die?" So as the movie series goes on, it kind of loses it. But I like the idea that Loomis is Michael's hype man because he tried so hard to help him and it just didn't work out. Though the remakes make him more of just the archetypical, he wanted to get famous off of Michael Myers' casebook, which is just not interesting to me. Fun fact about him, though, is he was actually supposed to originally be played by Peter Cushing.
Oh, he is Van Helsing!
That's hype.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the point, right? Like, it was supposed to literally be a Van Helsing thing. And then he turned it down because the movie had no budget. It was literally on $300,000. Like, that's literally his salary. Christopher Lee was also going to be courted, but he declined for basically the same reason.
That would be so weird if either of those two were in this film. That would be legitimately so... Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, didn't Malcolm McDowell play him in one of the movies?
Yeah, Malcolm McDowell is the one in the Rob Zombie remakes.
Oh, okay, cool. That's cool.
Like, just imagining if they got Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee to be the psychiatrist and Michael Myers respectively. What would the landscape of horror look like?
It definitely would have given it a different vibe for sure. It probably would have been more like Monster of the Week had they gotten those guys.
That's like that little Domino meme where it's like Christopher Lee agrees to play a minor character in a Halloween film that ends up with like he is not fucking Count Dooku in Star Wars. Like that,
the
his career goes
do not exist.
way. Yeah, exactly.
That is insane.
That's funny.
Yeah, I never knew that. That is the production history and like the legacy and like what Halloween means to people and like the tradition of it is so fascinating. Like it is almost more fascinating than the films themselves, because it is such a story. Like I would love, like I checked out some documentaries, but they were more so like the usual like, oh yeah, well we like to do this, and like, you know, general like talking heads popular thing. I would love just to see a fucking like the real story of like every single film and every single like, oh yeah, I hated this. Like every story come out in one giant documentary would be the best. I'd call it Halloween 2.
There's a number of really great YouTube video essays out there that kind of chronicle the history of the franchise, just because there's so much going on in all of their production histories. Curse of Michael Myers had a very similar, like, release the Snyder cut kind of history, where it's very much two different movies, and there's a lot of deleted scenes, and there's a version of it that's arguably more complete, that's actually pretty good. But that's the one that never got theatrically released, and you kind of had to hobble together with home video releases. And then Halloween's 4 and 5 are very much a two-parter that serve as kind of a setup for that sixth movie, and they're probably the best in the franchise as far as like everything outside of the first movie. And there's been talk of like making sequels to Season of the Witch at some point along the line too. Like there's so much in this franchise that's worth exploring that I feel like you can't really make a Halloween movie that's super divergent and say that it isn't at least somewhere rooted in what these movies were at one time or another. I feel like if I ever got to be a director, I would love to make a Halloween movie. I feel like there is just so much untapped potential in everything these movies do. Like, a Halloween has the potential to be like one of the most intricate, psychedelic, thematically heavy horror movies of all time. And instead, it's just a schlocky story about a dude who murders babysitters. And that's kind of beautiful.
Mm.
It definitely is a very, even at its purest, at its most original, it still very much tells you exactly what the horror genre's priorities are.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a benefit and a negative. All right. Unless anyone else has got anything they want to say, I'm good to call this episode.
I want to mention one last thing.
Shoot.
Just because I love these movies.
Shoot.
But I've always had a theory. I don't know a lot about music, and I don't know a lot about like the production of horror movies in general. So maybe I'm talking out of my ass when I say this, but I've always had the theory that there's no bad horror movie with great music, and there is no good horror movie with bad music. And Halloween's soundtrack, and Michael Myers' theme in particular, is like top 5 best soundtracks and main character themes of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, by miles, it's so good and so catchy.
It's in a bizarre time signature, which is cool. It adds to the unevenness of it, which is always fun.
And I also think it's interesting that, in general, the sound design in this film is great. Like, I think the sound design in this film is one of the things that is... I can critique a lot of other aspects of it, but just like the timing of cues and the use of certain sounds and the how hard you can hear Michael Myers' constant breathing, like all of that, I think is what really ties the film together most of all. Is I was super impressed by the sound just in general.
It's also just got this great sort of cue where, like, anytime something like scary is about to happen, you hear that sort of like high pitched turn. That's just really, really alarming. I love it. I love the music of this movie. It freaks me out to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay then. What are we gonna have for ratings? Let's start with Matt.
With me? Oh
Yes,
my
with
goodness.
you. You will be the first to die on Halloween night.
Oh no. Geez, man. You know, it's a movie that unfortunately I feel like there's a lot of interesting things to say about it, and especially its impact. But at the end of the day, I can't say I have a terribly great time going back to it personally. So I don't know, man. I'm gonna give it 3 out of 5. Young Michael Myers clown costumes.
For me, I very muchly enjoyed talking about it. I think there is a lot to it, and I definitely do not regret watching it. I think it is just an interesting watch in general, especially if you are studying film or wanting to understand horror movies and stuff. It's just a very insightful watch. You'll pick up a lot of things if you've watched other things, I think adds to it. And again, the behind the scenes stories and all of that is just one of the funniest movie making things you can know. It's just every single thing with Halloween is always a joy when you learn some new facet about it. But for me, just as a film, it's not something I can see myself going back to anytime soon. And the watch itself was genuinely pretty dull until I tried to put myself into it, and it still didn't really get there for me, but I can respect a lot of it. So for that, I'm going to land smack back in the middle and give it 3 out of 5 fast jerks with fast cars.
I really, really enjoy these movies. I enjoy talking about them and showing them to people more than I enjoy sitting in my apartment alone watching them. That's for sure. I, to this day, wish I could just get a group of people together and we would just binge all of them, because I think that'd be so much fun, and I would just talk about all of it. Because there's just so much to say. There's so much to say about that weird fucking cowboy with a shotgun that frees Michael Myers from jail that's never explained. There's just so much happening in these movies. But they're definitely not great. And the first one has a lot to talk about that has very little to do with it in a proper sense. But I enjoy it. I like watching it. I like a lot about it, and I feel like it's not a bad idea to constantly remake this movie, because I think it kind of needs it. And doing that gives the original a weird element of more layers to it, because every time someone remakes it and starts picking up on a really subtle thing from the first one, it becomes a lot more amplified when you go back to it. The family dynamic stuff that Rob Zombie focused on really colors this movie now. The stuff you get in the new series, which is more about the idea of the shape, gets a lot more amplified now because of it. Just the landscape of slasher movies amplifies whatever's going on in this one. It's just a really good looking glass. It's a really good sort of just like impressionistic painting of, it doesn't mean anything on its own, but you start thinking about where you're standing in relation to it and it suddenly means a whole lot. So I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 impossible to lug upstairs tombstones.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
That was a
then.
weird scene.
Yeah, there are some scenes that you point out just like, that was a choice.
Yeah, like, when the fuck did this dude have time to booby trap his house with bodies and tombstones? Like, what? Where did any of this come from?
Look, he can move fast when he wants to. He's got super speed whenever he's not being viewed. He's like a weeping angel.
I forgot Michael kills like 2 dogs in this movie. 0 out of 5.
Yeah, fucking cancelled.
That one shot disturbed me. I was like,
That was pretty freaky. That was pretty freaky.
That's the one shot I'm remembering now. That I'm just like, oh, that actually kind of got to me.
We don't want to talk
Also,
about
not
what
the
happens
only
to the
time he will
doggos.
kill dogs in terrible ways as the franchise goes on.
Ooh.
Oh, so it's like JoJo. Okay, then. We're in a bad place. But dog killing is not what we're here for on Geeky Gentlemen. We are a horror month that respects all doggos. And so the topic of our next thing shall not be horror doggos. That would be funny. It will it will be something I brought up, and because we got mentioned Christopher Lee, I thought, oh, this would be fun to do as a discussion topic. I want to talk about vampires. Just in general, our favorite versions, our preferences for vampires, our like just general opinions, thoughts, what we'd like to see done, everything. In the same way that in Geeky Gentlemen, we did another one a couple months ago, probably a year ago at this point, about zombies. Is I want to kind of do that just about vampires as a whole. So that should be fun.
Oh my god, fucking get ready to hear me wax lyrical about Vampire the Masquerade for fucking ever. It's my favorite thing.
I'm just gonna spend an
Hell
hour talking
yes.
about Angel. I'm excited.
Yeah,
Hell yes.
I knew both you two would be good for that one, considering we've all mentioned vampire shit in non-related topics.
Vampires are just a constant mood, honestly.
Vampires are the best.
And
they're
so you shall see us then as we continue our trek through the darkness and mysteries of Geeky Gentlemen Horror Month. I have been the Count of the Oppressed.
I have been the horror erotica lover.
You know that's actually less scary than the Sonic erotica lover.
I have been the Sonic horror erotica lover.
And I am the shape.
And we will be watching you.
Doom 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 doom.